The moment he breathed his last, heaven did not stay silent. It was 3 o'clock, the 9th hour, the time of the evening sacrifice, and yet the sacrifice was not being made in the temple, but on a Roman cross. The sun, bright at its peak, suddenly recoiled. Light surrendered to shadow. Day collapsed into night. Without warning, without clouds, without eclipse. The darkness fell like a curtain, thick and full drawn across the face of the world. Not dusk, not shadow, but darkness complete, unnatural, undeniable. Children clung to their mothers. Pilgrims paused mid-step. Merchants stilled their hands. And across the hills of Judea, silence reigned. No birds sang, no wind stirred. Even the temple bells seemed to hold their breath. Some looked up in fear, others looked down in shame, and a few fell to their knees. Heaven had closed its eyes. In the unseen realms, the angelic host grew silent. No song echoed through the stars. The throne room stood still. The cherubim lowered their wings. And above Golgotha, where the Lamb was dying, the skies turned to coal, as if creation itself could not bear to witness its Maker's final breath. A seraph whispered, "Shall we not cry out?" But no command came, only stillness. Amos had seen this day. Centuries earlier, the prophet wrote, "I will cause the sun to go down at noon, and I will darken the earth in broad daylight." Amos 8:9. Now the words burned true. The sun did not set, it hid. Not from night, but from wrath. The light of the world was dying, and even the stars seemed to mourn. Down below, 2 men stood near the temple gate. One old, his robe weathered. The other, young eyes wide with fear. Is this an eclipse?" the boy whispered. The elder shook his head slowly. "No, child, not during Passover. The moon is full. The heavens, they do not behave this way." A pause. The boy's voice trembled. "Then, what is it?" The old man did not answer. His eyes turned toward Golgotha, and his lips barely moved. Perhaps the darkness is mourning its king. 3 hours passed. Not a bird flew, not a dog barked, no fire was lit. Only darkness, like a second death, like judgment hanging in the air, like the breath before the storm. The priests inside the temple whispered among themselves. The incense refused to rise. The flame in the holy place flickered and died. And somewhere in a quiet house near the city wall, a woman named Mary fell to her knees and wept. Have you ever felt it? That silence that speaks louder than thunder. That moment when the world seemed suspended. This wasn't weather. It wasn't cosmic chance. It was divine grief and cosmic witness. The sun mourned its creator. The sky turned away from the sight of sin placed on sinless shoulders. For 3 hours, light itself refused to shine. And in that darkness, redemption began. For 3 hours, the darkness held. Not a flicker, not a ray. As if light itself had fled the world. In the marketplace, voices hushed. In the temple, priests fumbled their rites. In homes and alleys, people gathered, waiting for a sign or an end. Mothers held infants tight. Scribes whispered psalms from memory. Some wept, others stared at the heavens with clenched fists. And the soldiers, they stood still, unmoving shadows, uncertain whether to fear heaven or their own trembling legs. From the heavenly realms the watchers observed. 1,000 eyes that once sang at creation, now silent. They looked down, not in triumph, but in reverent sorrow. A younger angel, wings quivering, asked, "Why don't we stop them?" No reply. Another said, "Why does the Father turn his face?" Still no answer. Only the slow passing of divine purpose through pain. Far below, the cross cast no shadow, for there was no light to catch it. Only the shape of a man, suspended between earth and heaven, and the weight of eternity pressing down. Near the city wall, 2 men spoke in hushed tone. "You were there, weren't you?" one asked. His companion, older bearded eyes sunken with grief, nodded once. I saw him. Did he cry out? A pause. Not for himself. They stood in silence, the younger man shaking his head. This can't be. He was just a teacher, a rabbi, a man. The old man turned toward the blackened sky. Then why does the sun refuse to shine for him? A silence deeper than doubt followed. In the courts of the temple, incense refused to rise. The coals grew cold. A priest dropped the shofar. It clattered, but no one moved to pick it up. The curtain that guarded the Holy of Holies fluttered. Not from wind, but from something else, something unseen. An older Levite gripped the altar. His lips mouthed Leviticus, but his heart faltered. Outside, a child cried out, "Abba, is this the end of the world?" His father could not answer. The darkness pressed inward. Not just on the land, but on the soul. It had weight, it had presence. And somewhere, behind the veil of the visible, hell stirred uneasily. Not in victory, not in delight, but in dread. They knew something heaven had not yet spoken, that this death was not defeat, that in this stillness something was coming. Have you ever stood in silence so deep it felt alive? Where time doesn't move, and sound dares not enter. That was the 9th hour, when creation itself stood at attention, when heaven held its breath, when judgment passed, not upon the guilty, but upon the innocent. And if darkness could tremble, it would have trembled then. The darkness had not lifted, but something else had begun. It started beneath the feet, a whisper in the stone, a shiver in the soil. A Roman centurion shifted uneasily. He had felt tremors before March's siege drills, collapsing walls. But this was deeper, like the earth itself was holding its breath and losing hold. Small rocks danced across the ground. The crossbeam creaked above. And then, a sound low and guttural rose from beneath. A groan. The land cried out. From Golgotha, the vibration spread down into the ravines, into the city walls, through the temple courts, out to the olive groves. People stumbled, jars shattered, torches dropped and rolled. Mothers screamed, children wept. The ground that once felt sure now buckled like water. Buildings cracked, fissures split the roads, tombs broke open like wounds. And all across Jerusalem, creation trembled at the death of its creator. 2 Roman soldiers near the base of the cross braced themselves. One gritted his teeth, barked, "Quake, the Judean fault line, always unstable." The other didn't answer. His hands were shaking, his eyes fixed on the torn sky. "No, this is not fault lines. This is fury." The first scoffed geology. The second whispered, "The earth is mourning." And though neither would admit it aloud, both reached for something to hold on to. Down below in the belly of the earth, stone groaned. Caverns sighed. Flames flickered in ancient hollows. The breath of death stirred. This was not the cracking of crust nor the settling of layers. This was the soil reacting to blood it had drunk, to innocence it had soaked in, to righteousness it could not contain. The prophet had written it long ago. The mountains quaked before the Lord. Judges 5:5. The earth shook when God came down. Exodus 19:18. At Sinai, the ground trembled because God descended. Now it trembled again because God died. Inside the temple, golden bowls clattered. A lampstand toppled. A priest screamed as the floor cracked beneath the altar. The veil, still whole for now, quivered at the edges. Soon it too would break, and behind it, in the Holy of Holies, the presence had already departed. Outside, near a tomb, just beginning to split, an old woman fell to her knees. She looked toward the hill and whispered, "The mountain is crying." Her granddaughter, clinging to her shawl, asked, "What does it mean, Safta?" The woman held the child close. "It means The world is not what it was. Have you ever felt the ground betray you? That terrifying moment when everything you trusted moves. That was this moment. Not just physical upheaval, but spiritual. Not just terrain shifting, but truth. The foundations of the old world cracked. The age of sacrifice, splitting down the middle. The age of distance beginning to collapse. The quake was not destruction, it was revelation. Heaven's way of saying something new is being born. The ground did not settle. It surged. It heaved like a wounded beast. Cracks split open with groans that echoed through stone. From the foot of Golgotha, a fissure raced like lightning down the slope, jagged black alive. It tore through gardens, climbed the temple steps, snapped the marble of the outer courts. Inside a tomb near the valley, stone lids shifted, dust poured out, and something ancient stirred. A strange light flickered from within the crevices, not fire, not sun, but something other. A shimmer like torn silk, a glow like morning stars. And from deep below, a sound emerged, not a voice, but a hum. As if the deep places of the world remembered his name. At the temple, a priest clutched a young boy behind the altar. They had been preparing incense. Now they clung to silence. The boy whispered, "What's happening, Master?" The priest, face pale, answered, "The ground is breaking." The child pointed toward the sanctuary, where shadows danced unnaturally. "Is it an earthquake?" The priest hesitated. "Perhaps, but not from beneath. This is from above." They both turned to the inner curtain. It swayed, but no wind had entered. Outside, the streets filled with people staggering like drunken men. Dust hung in the air. Walls cracked like eggshells. Statues fell face first. The sacred stones of the city, laid with prayers and tears, now trembled under an unseen burden. Some ran, some knelt. Some stared at the cross. Still upright, still bearing him, even as the world collapsed. Beneath the earth, in places no eye had seen since Eden, rivers of fire hissed. Bones shifted. Graves sighed open. Not resurrection, not yet, but something was preparing, something awakening. The earth was not just reacting, it was responding. Long ago at Sinai, the mountain had trembled when God descended. The whole mountain shook violently. Exodus 19:18. But now, the mountain quaked because God was departing. The giver of law had been condemned by the lawless. The maker of men was crucified by his creation. And the earth, which had once welcomed him, now cracked open in protest. This was not just tectonic, this was theological. Back inside the temple, the boy asked again, "Will it stop?" The priest's hands trembled, his voice broke. "It must. Because if it doesn't, it means the world cannot exist without him. Have you ever seen the foundations give way? Not just of stone, but of certainty." That's what was happening. Everything once considered solid temple law, blood sacrifice, now trembled at the foot of one broken man on a tree. And in that trembling, a truth began to rise. If God can die, then nothing will ever stay the same. It stood 60 feet tall, woven thick with blue, purple, and scarlet. 4 inches deep, hung from gold-plated hooks, spanning the width of the temple. The veil, the final barrier, the line between man and God, between blood and glory, between pleading hands and holy fire. For 1,500 years it had stood, unripped, untouched, unquestioned. Only one man, only once a year, only with blood, only for moments. Then it was closed again. And now, in the darkness, in the shaking, in the hour no one could understand, a sound split the silence. A tear, not fabric, but history. Not from bottom to top, as if hands reached up, but from top to bottom, as if God himself reached down. Inside the sanctuary, priests stumbled. A bowl crashed, incense spilled. One cried out, The curtain. They turned, and there it was, the veil tearing, ripping, screaming like thunder in cloth. Not fraying, not aging, but rending clean and violent. A holy wound. One priest dropped to his knees. His lips trembled with half-formed prayers. Another leaned against the wall, whispering, "It's open. The holy place is open." Neither moved closer. They had spent their lives avoiding that space, fearing that space. Now it beckoned, bare, exposed, unhidden, and it terrified them. In the streets the sound was heard, a deep tearing, like the sky had split, like something eternal had snapped. Some said it was thunder. Others just stared at the Temple Mount and wept, for something sacred had been broken. But this was not destruction. This was revelation. The veil did not tear to let God out. It tore to let us in. The barrier was not fabric, it was sin. And in that moment when the veil ripped, so did the body of the Lamb. Not in pieces, but in purpose. The writer of Hebrews would later say, "We have confidence to enter the most holy place by a new and living way through the curtain that is his body." Hebrews 10:19-20. The torn veil was a mirror of torn flesh. What centuries of ritual could not do, one death did. Back in the temple, one priest looked at the gap. His hands trembled. He turned to his companion. "What now?" he asked. The other answered with a whisper, "We can no longer keep him out. Have you ever seen something sacred break and feel the world shift? That was this moment." The veil tore. The distance ended. The invitation began. The most holy place was no longer hidden. And in its unveiling, the heart of God was laid bare. The veil did not fall. It was torn, with purpose, with precision. And as it split, a shaft of light broke through the shadows, not from candles, but from something eternal. From heaven, the angels watched. One whispered, "The barrier is gone." Another answered, "No, it has become the way." For in that tearing, the Father declared no more division, no more distance. That veil had once said, "Stay out. You are not holy. You are not clean." Now it said, "Come in." Through him. Because of him. The sacrifice had not just satisfied wrath. It had opened the door. In a home near the market, a young girl sat beside her grandmother. Both had heard the rumble. Both had felt the shift. The girl asked, "Does this mean we can see him now?" The old woman hesitated, then slowly nodded. "He will no longer dwell behind curtains. He will dwell within hearts." And the girl smiled, not fully understanding, but sensing something holy had just drawn near. Elsewhere, a scholar clutched his Torah scrolls. He had spent his life debating ritual, the right incense, the right timing, the right lineage. But now, the curtain was gone. The rules that once kept men safe from God had been fulfilled by the God who became man. You see, this was not mere fabric. This was finality. Finality of fear, of separation, of exclusion, and the beginning of something wild and free and alive. No more lambs, no more blood on doorposts, no more appointed feasts to draw near. He had drawn near, and his body, bruised, pierced, stretched out, had become the new veil. Torn, that we might enter. Broken, that we might be whole. The veil did not just reveal the holy place. It revealed the holy person. Jesus, the true tabernacle, the true priest, the true access. What had been whispered through prophets, shrouded in symbols hidden behind smoke, now stood open, for all, forever. Have you ever longed for something, and suddenly found the way clear? That's what this was. Centuries of longing, of exile, of wandering, all answered in a single tear. Back in the temple, no one moved to repair it. How could they? It was not theirs to mend. It had been torn by love. And from that day forward, no curtain could contain him. No temple could define him. For God had stepped out and into us. The quake had stilled, the veil had torn, but the ground was not finished speaking. In forgotten corners of Jerusalem, tombs groaned. Stones shifted. Graves sealed for generations began to breathe. Not with rot, not with decay, but with something waiting, something sacred, something awakening. Dust rose in lazy spirals above burial sites. Olive branches snapped in silence. The air turned colder. Time seemed to bend. It was as if the earth itself paused to witness what came next. A young boy walking with his father past a family tomb stopped. He pointed. "Abba, the stone. It's cracked." The man froze. There, beneath the inscription of his grandfather's name, a fracture split the entrance. He stepped closer, pressed a hand against the stone. It was warm, not from sun, but from something within. He stepped back. "Not today," he whispered. "Not yet." In the hills, an old burial cave moaned. Within it, bones stirred. Not in chaos, but in order. As if remembering who they were. A shin aligned with a thigh. Ribs cradled lungs long silent. Fingers curled, not in death, but in readiness. From above, heaven watched. One angel whispered, "They are not cold yet." Another replied, "But they've been awakened." This was not resurrection, not fully, but the promise had taken root. The power released at Golgotha did not stop at the surface. It reached downward into history, into memory, into the very dust of faith. These were not common graves. These were the resting places of saints, of prophets, of the faithful who had longed for Messiah and died with hope in their bones. Now the tremor had reached them. The voice had not yet spoken, but the earth had heard it coming. In one tomb, a body once wrapped in linen lay perfectly still. Then a breathless silence, a flicker of light behind closed eyes. Not movement, but preparation, a waiting. Back in the city, a widow stood near a family crypt. She watched as a chunk of stone fell away. Her breath caught. The name carved on the lintel was her husband's. "Eleazar," she whispered. She stepped forward, knelt by the crack, pressed her hand to the edge. Nothing, yet somehow, she knew. He was listening. Have you ever stood at a grave and felt the silence wasn't empty? That's what this was. Not ghosts, not legends, but the earliest whisper of resurrection. The same power that tore the curtain that split the rocks had now reached into death itself and shaken it, not to destroy, but to declare, "Your grip is temporary." They did not rise all at once. There was no trumpet, no blaze of light, just breath returning. First to the lungs, then to the limbs, then to the eyes. The saints, long asleep, long forgotten, now stirred. Not radiant, not glorified, but undeniably alive. One by one they sat up, in caves, in tombs, in shadows. Some blinked against a light they had not seen for centuries. Others looked at their hands, scarred by time, now renewed. There were no words, only knowing. Their hearts beat because his had stopped. In a narrow alley near the Valley of Hinnom, a woman dropped her basket. She stared at the figure emerging from a tomb, clothed in burial linen, walking slowly, steadily. The face, weathered but familiar. She stepped forward. "Abba?" she asked. The figure stopped. His eyes met hers, and he smiled. She wept, not out of fear, but wonder. From above, an angel watched. Another joined him. They spoke in quiet tones. They are awake, but not yet revealed. They will wait until he walks out first. Back inside the tombs, the saints stood still. They did not run. They did not speak. They simply waited, as if tethered to another resurrection. As if knowing they would not precede him, they would follow. Ezekiel had seen this day. A valley of bones, scattered dry, forgotten. Then a voice, a breath, a movement, and the bones came together, and breath entered them. Ezekiel 37. Now, that prophecy stood upright in flesh and spirit, not as vision, but as reality. The graves had yielded, because one greater had descended deeper than they. This was no magic, no spell, no accident. This was authority. Christ's authority, echoing backward through time. His sacrifice had not only redeemed the living, it had remembered the faithful dead. In one quiet crypt, a hand touched the wall. A name once carved by grandchildren, now felt again by the one who bore it. He smiled and whispered, "You did not forget me, Lord." Have you ever seen death start to unravel? That's what this was. Not final, not finished, but fractured. A crack in the grave, a hole in despair. The saints did not yet walk the streets. That would come later. After Sunday, after the stone. But already, the impossible had begun. Because the dead had heard the voice of the one who stepped into their darkness and said, "Wait for me." The soldier did not speak. He had seen death before, hundreds of times, but never like this. Never in silence, never in awe. His name was Longinus, a centurion, hardened by war, numbed by blood. He stood beneath the cross, armor-stained hands still trembling from the final blow. He had driven the spear. He had seen the blood. He had heard the cry. And now he stood frozen. Around him, soldiers muttered. Some looked away, others stared at the sky still black at mid-afternoon. But Longinus watched the man, still, limp, lifeless, yet somehow not defeated. He remembered the moment just before the final breath. The man looked down into his eyes, not with hate, not with pain, but with knowing. Longinus had looked away. Now something stirred, not in the earth, but in his chest. It was unfamiliar, unwelcome, unstoppable. Guilt, regret, recognition. A whisper rose within him. He did not die like the others. He died for the others. He dropped to one knee, not from exhaustion, but reverence. His sword clattered to the ground. The weight he had carried, Order's armor, silence, now cracked like the earth beneath him. Thunder rolled in the distance, but he did not flinch. Instead, he looked up, and for a moment, the clouds parted. Just enough. A single shaft of light, narrow piercing, fell upon his face. And in that light, his soul breathed for the first time. He heard nothing around him. No crowd, no weeping, no curses. Only silence. The kind that surrounds sacred things. He spoke soft at first, then louder, with certainty. "Surely," he whispered, "surely this man was the Son of God." The other soldiers turned. Some sneered, some stepped back. But none spoke, because in that moment they felt it too. The air had changed, the veil had torn, and a Roman had seen the truth. Have you ever done something you cannot undo, and yet felt forgiven before you asked? That's what he felt. Longinus had pierced the side of God and received mercy. Not punishment, not wrath, but revelation. He touched his breastplate, then his forehead, making a mark. Not a Roman salute, a sign of surrender. And the angels watched. One leaned to another and said, even the executioner saw. That day a cross stood tall. A man lay broken, and a soldier knelt changed. Because some see with eyes, but others with the soul. The moment passed, the sky remained dark, but something had shifted. Not in heaven, in him. Longinus stood slowly. His hands still trembled, not from cold, but awakening. The man on the cross was gone, but his presence remained. He remembered his past. So many crucifixions, so many names, forgotten, buried, routine. He had mocked, he had laughed, he had cursed dying men. But today, he had been silent, not by command, by awe. He replayed the moment again. The spear, the flow, the cry. That cry, "Father, into your hands. I commit my spirit." No one dies like that. Not with peace, not with purpose. His comrades talked quietly, nervous glances, heavy silence. But Longinus stared at the ground, at the blood. Thick, dark, still warm. Some had splashed on his face, unnoticed at first. Now it dried across his brow, a streak, crimson, right above his eyes. He reached up, touched it with 2 fingers, and paused. What is this? But a mark. What is this? But mercy. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since he was a child, he prayed. Not in Latin, not in ritual, but in longing. I have killed, and you still call me. I pierced, and you forgive. A wind moved across Golgotha, gentle, strange. It stirred the dust, and carried a scent not of death, but myrrh. Longinus wept, not for guilt, but for grace. Not because he deserved it, but because it came anyway. He turned to leave, then stopped. He looked again at the cross, still empty, yet somehow not finished. A whisper passed through his heart. This is not the end. It is the beginning. He did not understand it all, but he knew this. If grace could reach him, the killer, then no one was too far. No soul was too lost. And as he walked away, the blood still on his brow, he did not feel shame. He felt marked, set apart, redeemed. The earth had quaked, the sky had darkened, but the greatest trembling was within his soul, and it would never stop. The room was dim. Lamps flickered, curtains drawn, voices hushed, breath shallow. It was not grief that filled the chamber. It was fear. High above the Temple Mount, inside a marble hall with gold trim and cedar beams, the council gathered. Not to mourn, but to plot. Caiaphas, the high priest, sat motionless. A parchment lay before him, half-written. The ink still wet. His hand trembling. To Pilate it read, "We request the tomb be sealed, lest his disciples steal the body and deceive the people." But even as he wrote, his heart whispered, "What if there's no deception?" Another stood, Pharisee, aged, eyes sharp, voice sharper. "This is not over," he said. The earth shook, the veil tore. Now the tomb. He did not finish. No one needed him to. "If they believe," he rose, he continued, "then we are undone." A Sadducee scoffed, "The dead do not rise." But his voice wavered. He had felt the quake, seen the sky turn black. Doubt gnawed beneath his denial. Outside, wind scraped across the roof, a dull creaking, wood on stone. Someone flinched. Another crossed himself. Though Pharisees do not cross, they waited, listening. Was it wind or something else? His voice still echoes. A young scribe muttered, eyes down, face pale. In the streets, in the children's questions, in the silence, Caiaphas slammed the table. Enough. His voice broke the hush. He stood tall, aged cracked, like the curtain that once hung behind him. We ended him, with trial, with law, with Rome. But his voice lacked certainty. Another Pharisee leaned forward. What if he ended us? Silence. Again. This time heavier. A priest stood near the window. He parted the curtain slightly. In the distance, the hill of execution still loomed. 3 crosses, one empty. The light of dusk caught it a red glint where blood had dried. He whispered. He said he would rise. The room breathed in sharply. Caiaphas closed his eyes. He remembered the trial, the calm face, the unwavering eyes. Destroy this temple and I will raise it. He had thought Jesus meant stone, brick, mortar. Now he wasn't sure. If he returns. Someone said, "What will become of us?" Another replied, "We will lose everything." And there it was, the truth. Spoken not in faith, but fear. This wasn't about truth. It was about control. Not about Messiah, about power. The lamp flickered. The wind howled louder, and a single feather fell from the rafters. No bird, just a feather, white, still. A sign or a warning. They did not ask. They did not want to know. The Pharisee clenched his fists. Seal the tomb, post the guard, spread the warning. Someone muttered, "Even if he is dead." His voice walks among us. They did not answer. They only nodded and feared, because in their deepest hearts, they wondered, what if the voice they tried to silence was the only voice that could not die? The sun dipped low. Shadows stretched across Jerusalem, but two men walked against the darkness. Not soldiers, not disciples, but members of the council. Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodem. They had been silent, cautious, afraid. But something had changed. They moved with resolve through alleys past courtyards to Pilate's chamber. They bowed low and spoke plainly. "We request the body." Pilate raised an eyebrow. "You Pharisees." Joseph nodded. "We are more than that now." Permission was granted. Guards dispatched. Time was short. They approached Golgotha. The crowd had dispersed, the screams gone, only silence. And him, his body hung still, beaten, torn. The sky, now bronze, seemed to mourn quietly. "Nicodem," whispered, he called me by name once, told me of being born again. Joseph responded, "Perhaps this is our second birth." They worked quickly, reverently, each motion worship. They brought linens and myrrh, 75 pounds, a royal amount for a crucified man. They climbed, with care, removed the nails, each one a thunderclap in their hearts. They caught his body as it fell limp into their arms. Still warm, still sacred. They washed the wounds with tears. They wrapped his limbs with trembling. They pressed the spices into broken flesh, and as they did, the scent filled the air. Myrrh, aromatic, overwhelming. It masked the blood. It hid the death. It prepared the way for something else, for resurrection. No words were spoken, only breath and silence. They carried him to the tomb Joseph had carved unused, untouched, now consecrated. Inside stone walls, dark and cool, they laid him down. On linen, on stone, they lingered. Nicodem touched his hand. "One last time." "This is not goodbye," he whispered. "This is waiting." Outside they rolled the stone. Heavy. Final. Or so they thought. No angels yet. No trumpet. Just two men walking away with hope wrapped in grief. But behind the stone, heaven was not still. Morning broke, but no one felt peace. The temple priests had not slept. Their dreams were restless, their hearts still shaken by torn curtains and trembling ground. At dawn they gathered again, but not for prayer, for strategy. A delegation left the temple, rushed to Pilate's court, hoods pulled low, eyes darting. Their robes whispered fear with every hurried step. They bowed before the governor and spoke. "Sir, we remember what that deceiver said while he was still alive. After 3 days I will rise again." Pilate raised an eyebrow. He had washed his hands, but the blood had not disappeared. "What do you want?" he asked. A priest stepped forward. "Command the tomb be secured until the 3rd day, lest his disciples steal the body and claim he has risen." The last deception, he added, would be worse than the first. Silence fell. Pilate studied them. These were not men of faith. They were men of fear, and their fear was louder than their hatred. He nodded. You have a guard. Go, make it as secure as you can. As secure as you can. Even Pilate knew some things could not be sealed. The priests returned, this time with Roman soldiers, hardened, heavily armed. They marched to the garden tomb, eyes cold, feet heavy. The stone was still in place, unmoved, massive. The guards inspected it, tested the edges, examined the slope. Then from a leather pouch they drew wax, a red seal, soft, hot. They pressed it between stone and rock and stamped it with Rome's mark. Not just to close the tomb, but to close the question. Not just to seal a grave, but to silence a prophecy. They posted watch, shields ready, swords drawn. 6 men, then 12. Day and night rotation. No one would tamper, no one would enter. Or so they thought. Behind the stone silence, but not stillness. The priests returned to the temple. The soldiers set their camp, and the stone remained cold. Yet the wind knew, the soil knew. Creation held its breath again. They tried to seal the word, to lock the promise, to bind the resurrection. But the wax could not hold, and the stone could not silence what heaven had already planned. They rolled a stone to contain eternity, but the tomb was never strong enough for life. Before the sun rose they came. Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother of James, Salome, hands trembling, hearts aching, spices clutched in linen wraps. They walked in silence, down familiar paths, to the garden tomb. The sky was deep gray, a hush over everything. Birds held their song. Even the olive trees stood still. One voice broke the silence. Who will roll the stone for us? No one answered. They knew the weight of it. They knew Rome guarded it. But grief had already pushed them past fear. They neared the tomb, and then the earth groaned. A tremor, then a jolt. The ground shook beneath their feet. From the heavens light erupted. Not sunrise, but something purer. A being descended, clothed in light, wreathed in fire. His appearance was like lightning, his robe white as snow. He landed beside the stone, touched it, and the great stone that Rome had sealed moved. Not cracked, not pushed from within, but rolled away, effortlessly, as if light itself had hands. The guards cried out, weapons dropped, knees buckled. Some collapsed as if dead. Others fled too afraid to scream. But the women, they stayed, frozen, terrified, and yet drawn in. The angel sat upon the stone, like a king on a throne after battle. He looked at them, eyes full of fire and mercy. He spoke, "Do not be afraid. You seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here." The words hung in the air like thunder spoken gently. "He has risen just as he said." The angel turned, gestured into the tomb. "Come, see the place where he lay." They stepped forward, slow, barefoot, hearts racing. The linen folded, the body gone, not stolen, not disturbed, but fulfilled. The angel continued, "Go quickly, tell his disciples, he goes before you into Galilee." Then he smiled, as if to say he kept his word, and vanished. The stone still rolled, the guards still stunned, but something had changed. Light had broken through, life had risen, and the silence of death was shattered forever. They ran, hearts pounding, tears streaming. The angel's words still echoed. "He is not here. He has risen." Mary Magdalene lagged behind, breathless, torn. The others disappeared into alleys, to find the men, to spread the wonder. But Mary stayed. She walked back, alone, back to the tomb. The stone still rolled, the guards still gone, but the body still missing. She stood at the entrance, looked inside, empty. Still, the linens folded, the space bare, and she wept. Not quiet tears, but the weeping of a world undone. A voice behind her. "Woman, why are you crying?" She turned, but did not recognize him. "Sir, if you've taken him away, tell me where. I will carry him." He looked at her, gently, fully, and said one word, "Mary." That was all, and it was enough. She gasped, eyes wide, heart igniting. She fell to her knees. "Rabboni, teacher, master, Lord." She reached for him, but he raised a hand. "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go. Tell my brothers I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary nodded, trembling. Tears still fell, but now they were light. Now they were joy. She rose, turned, ran. This time she did not weep. She flew to the others, to the hiding place, to the hearts still shrouded in darkness. And she declared, "I have seen the Lord." The resurrection began not with thunder, but with a whisper, not with armies, but with a name. Not in the temple, but in a garden. Eden reversed, hope restored. One woman, one name, one risen Lord. The resurrection did not end in the garden. It began there. Jesus appeared again and again, to the fearful, to the doubting, to the broken. He walked beside two men on the road to Emmaus. He broke bread and their eyes were opened. He entered locked rooms, not as a ghost, but in flesh and glory. He showed them his hands, his side, his scars, proof, promise, peace. He ate with them, cooked for them, spoke hope into their silence. Thomas touched his wounds. Peter was restored by firelight and grace. And then he sent them. The ones who had fled now stood. The ones who had denied now declared. The cross was no longer a symbol of defeat. It was a banner of victory. The tomb was no longer a place of mourning. It was a doorway. Death no longer an ending, but a passage. Because Jesus rose, everything changed. Fear became courage. Failure became testimony. Shame became story. The veil was torn. The door stood open. And the invitation still stands. Not just for Mary, not just for Thomas, not just for Peter, but for you. The same Jesus who called Mary by name calls you now. Not with thunder, not with force, but with love. A whisper in your spirit, a stirring in your soul, a question rising gently within your heart. Do you hear him? Will you answer? The stone has been rolled away. The way is open. The grave is empty. The risen Christ waits, not behind walls, not in temples, but here, with pierced hands extended. He calls your name. Will you respond? If this story stirred your soul, if the veil tore a little in your heart, then don't walk away the same. This resurrection is not just his, it's yours. Yours to enter, yours to carry. Here at Verse and Wisdom, we walk these sacred paths together, word by word, story by story, heart by heart. Thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you for letting Scripture breathe again. May the light that broke the tomb shine gently on your path. May the voice that called Mary call you by name again and again. Until we meet again in the next sacred story, go in peace. Go in wonder. Go risen. Go whole. See you soon. And remember, he is not here. He is risen.